Excuse me. Hey guys, welcome. I hope you're doing okay today. It's a bit of a rainy day outside. This was back from the gym, so a little bit out of breath, but I'm going to try to do an introduction to this book. It's been on my mind for some time to share with you guys. Let me just do the quick sound check as always before we get too far. Yeah, it is working as always. You can hear me coughing there. So, welcome, guys. Another day of reading, and we're picking up something very different today. So, this is not ACA literature. This is not reparenting literature, traditional reparenting literature. But I've selected this book because I'll just read the back. The Tao of Physics of Fritjof Capra, classic exploration of the connections between Eastern mysticism and modern physics. It's an international bestseller, the book's central thesis that the mystical traditions of the East constitute a coherent philosophical framework within which most advanced Western theories of the physical world can be accommodated, has not only withstood the test of time, but is ever more emphatically endorsed by ongoing experimental research. Fritjof Capra addresses recent scientific developments in this, the third edition, in the in the form of chapter length afterwards on the future of the new physics. And so this is a very interesting book. And why does it matter? Why am I bringing this up for reparenting? I'm not a physicist. I'm not like a genius mathematician. But one of the most critical parts of the reparenting journey is establishing a new worldview, working on your self-image and working on your worldview, your image of the world, right? And a lot of the times when you grew up in dysfunctional households, either your emotional neglect caused you to grow up without the support that you needed to intellectually advance and develop a functional or a useful worldview. And perhaps you were in the religious abuse side where the doctrination, the dogma that was kind of like forced on you was also very extremely ineffective because that was just your parents trying to brainwash you and program you into some certain pattern that might not qualify for your life. And so a way to look at this is when people start the process of reparenting, and I'll mention the ACA program. There's a point in which you have to choose a higher power of your own understanding. Okay. I've always believed in God, and I've never had a difficulty to have a spiritual feeling or to believe that and trust that God exists. Like it's something that comes by default to me, and that is because of my sensitivities, or I'm not sure how to my awarenesses, my intuition. It's a felt sense, you know. So it's not something. Luckily, I'm thankful for that I don't have to struggle. But many people struggle to rely on a higher power of our understanding, and that's I think where this book can come in handy, because you're taking Eastern mysticism and modern physics and actually showing how they support each other. You know, God, even if you're afraid of that word, is just energy. God is energy. That is all that God is. That's what I've always felt that God is. It's Aristotle called it the unmoving mover. So if you are aware of Aristotelian metaphysics, there's like a center point in the diagram, if you're aware. That's like a force, a pulse of energy that doesn't move, but it causes the motion and action of everything around it, right? So this is kind of the idea of God that I've always felt and truly believe exists. You know, I also kind of fall into this Baha'i religion where they, I don't follow any strict religions, but I really love the way that they explain spirituality and God, our connection with God. And basically, Baha'i says that there is one God, and all of the different religions are just ways that that same God connects with all different kinds of people. It's like languages, right? We all don't speak the same language. If you go to Brazil, you're going to be speaking Brazilian. If you go to Russia, you're going to be speaking Russian. If you go to China, Chinese. If you go to the US, English or Mexican, I don't know. Okay, that's a bad joke. But you get the point, right? Though people are still able to communicate, but they have different ways of communicating, right? People are always connecting to God, but they have different ways to connect to God. You know, it's the same thing. So for me, that was like such a common sense conclusion that I really don't understand why people struggle to get it unless they are stuck in that dogma, you know, that says, oh, it can only be this way, it has to be this way. And you know, this book is going to help us understand why that is not so relevant. Another reason why I chose this book is because, in line with what I just explained, people who doubt or have difficulty accepting God. So sometimes, not all all the time. People who are agnostic or atheist, they can be more based in science. So this book is literally talking about physics, and this book was published a while ago. It's not even recent. Let's see. I think it was in the 80s. 76, actually. 76 was the first time this book was published. And so this is not new information. And since 1976, we have only more information in quantum physics, right? That further buttresses and justifies or really explains Eastern mysticism, the workings of the universe through quantum physics. So this is a great start to this rabbit hole. And I'm hoping that it will really allow you to improve your worldview and be less hard on yourself. And so, the Tao of physics, it can be helpful for reparenting because it's really going to help you start to shift the way that you see yourself, the world, and reality. So when you're in the process of reparenting, you can think, I have so many things to change on myself, but it's really, I'm pointing to the third eye here, your perspective that needs to shift. It's much easier to change your perspective. This is what they call reframing, uh, reframing, or there are other words to describe this kind of process where you change your perspective on something, right? You change the way you define it, the way you see it. That's why this is important. This is a tool that's missing from those ACA programs and reparenting, for example, in the ACA. In terms of finding the higher power, I saw so many people get stuck on that and not really able to break through. And if you've grown up in a religion like a Southern Baptist convention where you're taught to really externalize the higher power and you're not realizing that God's presence is within you, then you are like literally disempowering yourself by putting the force outside of yourself, but it's within yourself. That is why changing the way you view your third eye, working with that crown, that third eye chakra, will really allow you to open up more to life and receive more information in the flow. I'm not going to keep talking about that too much longer, but I do want to just give you some background on like where the fuck did this book come from? Because reparenting is about developing a stable, compassionate inner authority to replace your old fear-based conditioning and that inner critic. And so this book draws on parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism. It really emphasizes interconnectedness. It lets you know that you are not isolated or broken because of your trauma. You are not isolated or broken. This world is natural, and everything that exists here is a natural response. Like the result of your traumatic or dysfunctional childhood is like not pleasant, and it's not what society maybe idealizes, but your experience is a natural part of life and the human experience. Think about how many people have lived on Earth and all of their different kinds of life experiences since the Earth was created. Like so many that you can't even possibly think about it. Some people had really lucky lives. Some people had a lot of pain. Most people probably in between somewhere, right? And so the idea is to start removing the pressure that you have on yourself, the pressure that's coming from your faulty perception of the world and reality and yourself. So that's again why this is so important. You are part of a dynamic and interconnected whole. You have a part to play. You're not broken and worthless. You still have a piece to play because this is like a large orchestration of energy. All of us, all living creatures, because the trees are also energy, the animals, the humans, like the minerals, and all of these things, these natural resources on Earth, they all are having some kind of energetic code, and that's the expression that's God's expression of that object. That's how you define energy. And again, this perspective of realizing that you're not broken or isolated or whatever you're feeling, it can really soften the shame and self-blame. The next is that it works you towards a rigid, more fluid identity. This book challenges rigid and fixed views of yourself. That flexibility supports healing old identity wounds formed in childhood. So they talk about how life is a dance of energy, a dance of forces. You'll see in the beginning section of this chapter 1. And that will make more sense as we advance in this book. And the next one is non-dual thinking. So moving beyond good or bad, right or wrong, binaries, moving beyond of that helps you to decrease the inner critic via reduction in your black and white thinking. Sorry, I'm like hiccuping. I tried to eat a wrap after gym and before I started, but I think I ate too fast. So I had like a little bit of hiccups. Excuse me. And I promise I want to get started with the book also soon. I just wanted to give you guys an introduction because this one is quite different. And the last is trust in the process. So physics at the quantum level reflects uncertainty and flow. This can encourage patience with emotional healing rather than demanding immediate control. So quantum physics is, if you guys hear people now, the spirituality healing stuff is getting more in the mainstream. So people are talking about like jumping timelines, stepping into new realities, new versions of yourself. You are the creator of your reality. That's why quantum physics is important. Quantum physics is like mathematically explaining how we achieve that. Like time travel is possible. Like, and you would think like when we grew up as kids, like, yeah, Einstein, before he died, he had kind of like postulated some ways that time travel could work. But since his death and advances in quantum physics, we've proved actually that can happen. We don't know how to do it, but they've almost basically proven that it's mathematically possible. Using quantum physics. And you might think this is like so like up in the clouds. Like, what the fuck is this for reparenting? But again, it is so important for changing your worldview and stepping outside of that faulty perspective. It's kind of like you need a shock, to get you jolted out of this traumatized, narrow worldview because of your dysfunctional childhood. This book kind of allows you to take a step back, expand, and relax, so that you're going more with the flow and taking part in the natural flow and ebb and flows of life. And so that's why I brought this book together. I don't know. I've been talking about this for a long time. I can't even see the time now. It's 11 minutes, almost over 10 minutes. So I'm gonna start in on the book now, chapter 1. But I really wanted to spend some time to talk about why this book is important in particular. So chapter 1, Modern Physics, a path with a heart. Any path is only a path, and there is no affront to oneself or to others in dropping it if if that is what your heart tells you. Look at every path closely and deliberately. Try it as many times as you think necessary. Then ask yourself, and yourself alone, one question. Does this path have a heart? If it does, the path is good. If it doesn't, it's of no use. This is a quote from Carlos Castaneda from his book, The Teachings of Don Juan. Modern physics has had a profound influence on almost all aspects of human society. It has become the basis of natural science, and the combination of natural and technical science has fundamentally changed the conditions of life on our Earth, both in beneficial and detrimental ways. Today, there is hardly an industry that does not make use of the results of atomic physics and the influences these have had on the political structures in the world throughout their application to atomic weaponry is well known. However, the influence of modern physics goes beyond technology. It extends to the realm of thought and culture, where it has led to deep revision in our conception of the universe and our relation to it. The exploration of the atomic and subatomic world in the 19th century has revealed an unsuspected limitation of classical ideas and has necessitated a radical revision for many of our basic concepts. The concepts of matter in subatomic physics, for example, is totally different from the traditional idea of material science in classical physics. The same is true for concepts like space, time, or cause and effect. These concepts, however, are fundamental to our outlook on the world around us, and with their radical transformation of our worldview, has begun to change. These changes, brought about by modern physics, have been widely discussed by physicists and philosophers over the past decade, but very seldomly has been realized that they all seem to lead to the same direction, towards a view of the world which is very similar to the view held in Eastern mysticism. So again, this is one of the main reasons why, sorry, I lost my pen. I like to take some notes when I'm writing so I can come back to these things. And this is really the crux of why I'm reading this again. Because if you're looking for safety or trust or stability or understanding in a higher power of your understanding as you're working through these 12-step programs or trying to rebuild your worldview. This is why the book is important. Because if you are atheist or agnostic, you rely on data. Well, this book here is proving to you that the more we learn about quantum physics, the more it's merging with spirituality. So that's again why it's so important. I feel like that will help you to kind of relax in a way into understanding of a higher power if you didn't grow up in that environment and if you don't have a natural um, inclination to believe in God and these kind of things. So continuing, the concepts of modern physics often show surprising parallels of the ideas expressed in the religion philosophies of the Far East. Although these parallels have not as yet been discussed extensively, they have been noticed by some of the great physicists of our century when they came in contact with Far Eastern culture during the lecture tour to India, China, and Japan. The following three quotations serve as examples. The general notion about human understanding, which are illustrated by discoveries in atomic physics, are not in the nature of things wholly unfamiliar, wholly unheard of, or new. Even in our own culture, they have a history, and in Buddhist and Hindu thought are more considerable and central place. What we shall find is an exemplification, an encouragement, and a refinement of old wisdom. This is a quote from Julius Robert Oppenheimer. From a parallel to the lesson of atomic theory, we must turn to those kinds of epistemological problems which already thinkers like Buddha and Lao Tzu have confronted when trying to harmonize our position as spectators and actors in the great drama of existence. This is a quote from Niels Bohr. The great scientific contribution in theoretical physics that has come from Japan since the last war may be the indication of a certain relationship between philosophical ideas and the tradition of the Far East and the philosophical substance of quantum theory. This is a quote by Werner Heisenberg. The purpose of this book is to explore the relationship between the concepts of modern physics and the basic ideas and the philosophical and religious traditions of the Far East. We shall see how the two foundations of the 20th century physics, quantum theory and relative theory, both force us to see the world very much in the way a Hindu, Buddhist, or Taoist sees it, and how this similarity strengthens when we look at recent attempts to combine these two theories in order to describe the phenomena of submicroscopic world, the properties and interactions of subatomic particles of which all matter is made. This is the infamous or famous God particle, the smallest undivisible unit within physics that can carry energy and is thus perhaps the purest form of God, God's energy, for example. Here, the parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism are almost striking. We shall often encounter statements where it is almost impossible to say whether they have been made by physicists or Eastern mystics. When I refer to Eastern mysticism, I mean the religious philosophies of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. Although these comprise a vast number of subtly interwoven spiritual disciplines and philosophical systems, the basic features of their worldview are the same. This view is not limited to the East, but can also be found to some degree in all mystically oriented philosophies. This is really an interesting point as well. So this is probably also explaining how this quantum physics and quantum physics theory is also relating to occult practices or even magic, perhaps. We'll see as we advance in this book. The argument of this book could therefore be phrased more generally by saying that modern physics leads us to a view of the world which is very similar to the views held by mystics of all ages and traditions. So, I mean, again, just to reiterate, that is why this book is so important. I would just go back one more time to read that sentence. The argument of this book could therefore be phrased more generally by saying that modern physics leads us to a view of the world which is very similar to the views held by mystics of all ages and traditions. And so, if we're able to accept the doubt that you might have about the religious or spiritual world because you cannot perceive it, you cannot see it, or whatever the reason is that you have, but then you have physicists who are scientists grounded in the reality, right? And they're able to find this connection that can maybe soften some of your resistance to a higher power, you know? And that's again why I'm explaining this, because I have a personal interest in trying to understand what really is God. How does God communicate? How does he work? What are the laws of the universe, that explain or dictate or govern um, how we interact with God on this plane? Mystical traditions are all present. Continuing with the reading, sorry. Mystical traditions are present in all religions. Sorry, and mystical elements can be found in many schools of Western philosophy. The parallels of modern physics appear not only in the Vedas of Hinduism, in the I Ching, or in the Buddhist sutras, but also in the fragments of Heraclitus, in the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, or in the teachings of uh, the Yaqui sorcerer Don Juan. I will have to admit that I don't know who that last guy is, the Yaqui sorcerer Don Juan, but I'm going to check that out. Put a note there. The difference between Eastern and Western mysticism is that the mystical schools have always played a marginal role in the West, whereas they constitute the mainstream of Eastern philosophical and religious thought. I shall therefore, for the sake of simplicity, talk about the Eastern world view and shall only occasionally mention other sources of mystical thought. If physics leads us today, if physics leads us today to a worldview which is essentially mystical, it returns in a way to its beginnings 2,500 years ago. It is interesting to follow the evolution of Western sciences along its spiral path, starting from the mystical philosophies of the early Greeks, right? So that mysticism started with the Greeks, how they understood the body, right? Rising and unfolding in an impressive development of intellectual thought that increasingly turned away from its mystical origins to develop a worldview which is in sharp contrast to the Far East. So there was more unity at some point, and over time, our worldviews in terms of the mysticism in the ancient world began to drift apart, and the Western mysticism became more, um, what do you call that? More maybe perhaps grounded or more based in, um, I forget the name of the word. I forget the word in English. Uh, um, Jesus Christ. When you have data that you can actually prove, or count, um, it begins with the E. That word will come back as soon as I start reading. Anyway, continuing with the reading. The time, however, is not based on intuition. This, wait a minute, I skipped too far. Where did I stop at? Oh, yeah, from Far East. In its most recent stages, Western science is finally overcoming this view and coming back to those of the early Greeks and Eastern philosophies. So now the return is coming. This time, however, it is not only based on intuition, but also on experiments of great precision and sophistication, and on a rigorous and consistent mathematical formalism. The roots of physics, all of Western science, are to be found in the first period of Greek philosophy in the 6th century, in a culture where science, philosophy, and religion were not separated. I mean, yeah, I love that. Science, philosophy, and religion together to understand the world. Like, I love that. And again, why I purchased this book is amazing for me. The sage of the Milesian school of Iona were not concerned with such distinctions. Their aim was to discover the essential nature or real constitution of things which they call physis. The term physics is derived from the Greek word and meant, therefore, originally, the endeavoring to see the essential nature of all things. Oh my God, that's so beautiful. I really love that sentence. Oh, the term physics is derived from the Greek word and meant, therefore, originally, the endeavor of seeing the essential nature of all things, including yourself. So impactful. This, of course, is also the central aim of all mystics. And the philosophy of the Milesian school did indeed have a strong mystical flavor. The Milesians were called Hyloxenists. There's a lot of new words in here, guys. Hyloxenists, or those who think matter is alive, by the later Greeks, because they saw no distinction between animate and inanimate, spirit and matter. That's really fascinating. Also, it's kind of like the mind and the body, like the subconscious mind is expressed through the physical body. You know, the illnesses, the posture, the movement, and so forth. The subconscious is then expressed. It's kind of interesting how he says they made no distinction. The Greeks made no distinctions between animate and inanimate, spirit and matter, because they understood the connection. Mind and body are one. Mind is spirit, and the body is matter. All of these things are coming back together. I hope you guys are geeking out on this as much as I am, because this is really phenomenal. In fact, they did not even have a word for matter, since they saw all forms of existence as manifestations of the physis, the original Greek word, endowed with life and spirituality. It's so beautiful, guys. Thus, Thales declared all things to be of gods, and Alexander saw the universe as a kind of organism which was supported by pneuma, the cosmic breath, in the same way as the human body is supported by air. The monistic and organic view of the Milesians was very close to that of ancient Indian and Chinese philosophy. The parallels to Eastern thought are even stronger in the philosophy of Heraclitus of Ephesus. My godfather is Greek, and he would be very disappointed with me pronouncing these words right now. Heraclitus believed in a world of perpetual change and eternal becoming. For him, all static being was based on deception, and his universal principle was fire, a symbol for the continuous flow and change of all things. Heraclitus thought that all changes in the world arise from the dynamic and the cyclic interplay of opposites, and he saw any pair of opposites as a unity. This unity, which contains and transcends all opposing forces, he called logos. I feel like this is a moment of Jesus Christ. I worked out too hard today. My brain is not even working, guys. A synchronicity right now, because this is kind of personal, but I feel like I just had a moment of synchronicity right now in this last sentence. The unity, which contains and transcends all opposing forces, he calls the logos. The split of this unity began with the Eleatic school, which assumed a divine principle standing above all gods and men. This principle was first identified with the unity of the universe, but was later seen as an intelligent and personal God who stands above the rest of the world and directs it. Thus began a trend of thought which led ultimately to the separation of spirit and matter, and to dualism, which became the characteristic of Western philosophy: good, bad, hot, cold, strong, weak. These kind of dualistic ways of seeing things, but most likely in the moral sense of good and bad. This is where things become very interesting, especially for our reparenting journey. Our faulty understanding, because of the lack of parenting, nurturing guidance, can cause us to develop a lot of faulty assumptions and perspectives about the world. And this book and text is helping us to break out of that. Let's see how much more I'm gonna read. I don't think I'm gonna read the whole chapter. When the mind, okay, maybe I will try to skip around a bit, because I'm seeing some very interesting things here. Let's see. The birth of modern science was no, not that one. Okay, so now he's also going to Descartes. Gosh, I should really read this whole chapter in order. Okay, so maybe we'll just read it then. A drastic step in this direction was taken from Parmenides. Jesus Christ, of Elea. I haven't been reading Greek in a really long time, guys. Who was strong in opposition to Heraclitus. He called his basic principle a being and held that it was unique and invariable. He considered change to be impossible and regarded changes we seemed to perceive in the world as mere illusions of the seen. The concept of indestructible substance as the subject of varying properties grew out of this philosophy and became one of the fundamental concepts of Western thought. In the 5th century BC, the Greek philosophers, tried to overcome the sharp contrast between the views of Parmenides and Heraclitus. In order to reconcile the idea of unchangeable being of Parmenides with that of eternal becoming of Heraclitus. So Parmenides thought that things are stable and don't change, and Heraclitus is talking about an continuing, never-ending state of becoming. Those are the two different forces or understandings of the world that they're trying to compare and contrast. They assume that being is manifest in certain invariable substances, the mixture and separation of which gives rise to the changes in the world. This led to the concept of the atom, the smallest indivisible unit of matter, which is found in its clearest expression in the philosophy of Lepicus and Democritus. The Greek atomist drew a clear line between spirit and matter, picturing matter as being made of several basic building blocks. These were purely passive and intrinsically dead particles moving in the void. The cause of their motion was not explained, but was often associated with external forces which were assumed to be of spiritual origin and fundamentally different from matter. In subsequent centuries, this image became an essential element of Western thought of dualism between mind and matter, between body and soul. As the idea of division between spirit and matter took hold, the philosophers turned their attention to the spirit world rather than the material world, to the human soul and the problem of ethics. Here we come back to just what I was saying before, how all of this is coming back to ethics, which is what made me fall in love with philosophy in the first place. I studied political philosophy and art history for my undergraduate. Back to the reading anyway. These questions were to occupy Western thought for more than 2,000 years after the culmination of Greek science and culture in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. The scientific knowledge of antiquity was systemized and organized by Aristotle, who created this scheme, which was the basis of the Western worldview of the universe for 2,000 years. But Aristotle himself believed that questions concerning the human soul and the contemplations of God's perfection were much more valuable than investigations of the material world. The reason the Aristotelian model of the universe remained unchallenged for so long was precisely this lack of interest in the material world and the stronghold of the Christian church, which supported Aristotle's doctrine throughout the Middle Ages. Further development of Western science had to wait until the Renaissance, when men began to free themselves from the influences of Aristotle and the church, and showed a new interest in nature. In the 5th century, the study of nature was approached for the first time in a truly scientific spirit, and experiments were undertaken to test speculative ideas. As this development was paralleled by a growing interest in mathematics, it finally led to the formation of proper scientific theories. Based on experiment and expressed in mathematical language, Galileo was the first to combine empirical knowledge with mathematics, and is therefore seen as the father of modern science. Nice little tidbit. The birth of modern science was preceded and accompanied by the development of philosophical thought, which led to an extreme foundation of the spirit-matter dualism. This formulation appeared in the 17th century in the philosophy of René Descartes, who based his views of nature on a fundamental division of two separate and independent realms. So Descartes also kept them separate: that of mind, res cogitans, and that of matter, res extensa. This Italian, that is not Italian, it's Latin. It's been a long time since I read Descartes. Also, oof, you guys, there's so much coming back now. The Cartesian division allowed scientists to treat matter as deadly and completely separate from themselves. To see the material world is a multitude of different objects assembled into a huge machine. Such a mechanistic worldview was held by Isaac Newton, who constructed his mechanics on its basis and made it a foundation of classical physics from the second half of the 17th century. I lost my place now. This text on this book is so small. I feel like I need the visual impaired version, or either some like binoculars or something, because this text is so small. From the second half of the 17th century to the end of the 19th century, this mechanistic Newtonian model of the universe dominated all scientific thought. It was paralleled by the image of an monarchical god who ruled the world from above by imposing his divine law on it. The fundamental laws of nature searched for by scientists were thus seen as laws of God, invariable, eternal, to which the world was subject. The philosophy of Descartes was not only important. The philosophy of Descartes was not only important for the development of classic physics, but also had a tremendous influence on general Western way of thinking up to the present day. Descartes' famous sentence, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I exist, has led Westerners to equate. I think I'm almost done. I'm almost done. It's 4 more pages, and to equate their identity with their mind instead of with their whole organism. As consequence of the Cartesian division, most individuals are aware of themselves as isolated egos existing inside their bodies. The mind has been separated from the body and given a futile task of controlling it, thus causing an apparent conflict between the conscious will and the involuntary instincts. Each individual has been split up further into a large number of separate compartments, according to his or her activities, talents, feelings, beliefs, etc., which are engaged in endless conflicts generated continuous metaphysical confusion and frustration. This inner fragmentation, the crux of why we are here reading this for reparenting, this inner fragmentation mirrors our view of the world outside, which is seen as a multitude of separate objects and events. The natural environment is treated as if it is consisted of separate parts to be exploited by different interest groups. The fragmented view is further extended to society, which is split into different nations, or races, religions, and political groups. The belief that all these fragments in ourselves, in our environment, and in our society are really separate can be seen as the essential reason for the present series of social, ecological, and cultural crises which we are still facing today, guys. Ooh. Let's see. Yeah, we're still facing all of that shit today. All those crises are kind of, in the beginning of this book, they said that in the 60s, uh, in the period of the 60s to 70s, I guess primarily in the United States, the energy that was rising was like more feminine energy taking over. So things associated with the subconscious mind. So I guess somewhere in between then, like the masculine consciousness and energy took back over because we've clearly been living in this male-led world patriarchy for a long time. And it's funny that the feminine conscious started to make a return in the 60s, 70s. I'm not really sure what's happened, but I hope we'll find out in this book because now a lot of people are talking about, because of the mass level of trauma and stress in the world, people are starting to like raise their conscious and their vibration. And this is really um, giving credence to the feminine energy. I forget which one is yin or yang. I think it's yang is feminine, right? So we're going back to that feminine, the subconscious mind, all of the things that are associated with the subconscious and the feminine energy. So the memory, emotions, all of those things. I feel like that's coming back. Or not. I know that's coming back now. I'm not only the one saying that. There are many people saying that right now. It's what we need to counteract this over dominance of patriarchy, right? But in any case, I kind of digress a bit. It has alienated us from nature and from our fellow human beings. It has brought grossly unjust distribution of our natural resources, creating economic and political disorder, an ever rising wave of violence, both spontaneous and institutionalized, and an ugly, polluted environment in which life has often become physically and mentally unhealthy. The Cartesian discussion and the mechanistic worldview have thus been benefited and detrimental at the same time. They were extremely successful in development of classical physics and theology, but many had adverse consequences for our civilization. It is fascinating to see that the 20th century science, which is originated in the Cartesian split, is the mechanistic worldview, and which indeed only became possible because of such a view now overcomes this fragmentation and leads back to the idea of unity expressed in the early Greek and Eastern philosophies. Beautiful, guys. Beautiful. Coming back to unity. In contrast to the mechanistic worldview, the Eastern view of the world is organic. I love that also. For the Eastern mystic, all things and events perceived by the senses are interrelated, connected, and are but different aspects or manifestations of the same ultimate reality. Our tendency to divide the perceived world into individual and separate things and to experience ourselves as isolated egos in this world is seen as an illusion which comes from our measuring and categorizing mentally. Fascinating. It is called avidya or ignorance in Buddhist philosophy and is seen as the state of a disturbed mind which has to be overcome. I think this is what people talk about when they're taking these psilocybin trips, that they have that dissolution of ego and they come back into this unity. It's beautiful that they're mentioning that. Here's the quote: "When the mind is disturbed by multiplicity, when the mind is disturbed, the multiplicity of things is produced. But when the mind is quiet, the multiplicity of things disappears." Although the various schools of Eastern mysticism differ in many details, they all emphasize the basic unity of the universe, which is the central feature of their teachings. The highest aim for their followers, whether they are Buddha, Hindus, Buddhists, or Taoists, is to become aware of the unity and mutual interrelation of all things, to transcend the notion of an isolated individual self, and to identify themselves with the ultimate reality. The emergence of this awareness, known as enlightenment, is not only an intellectual act, but is an experience which involves the whole person and is religious in its ultimate nature. I wonder why they said religious instead of spiritual. For this reason, Eastern philosophies are essentially religious philosophies. Interesting. In the Eastern view, then, the division of nature is in, in the Eastern view, then, the division of nature into separated objects is not fundamental, and any such object objects have a fluid and ever-changing character. The Eastern worldview is therefore intrinsically dynamic and contains time and change as essential features. The cosmos is seen as one inseparable reality, forever in motion, alive, organic, spiritual, and material at the same time. The science, since motion and change are essential properties of things, the force causing the motion are not outside the objects, as in the last two pages, as in the classic Greek view, but there are an intrinsic property matter. Correspondingly, the Eastern image of the divine is not that of a ruler who directs the world from above, but a principle that controls everything from within. He who dwelling in all things, yet is another than all things, whom all things do not know, whose body all things are, who controls all things from within, he is your soul, the inner controller, the immortal. The following chapters will show that the basic elements of the Eastern worldview um, are also those of the worldview emerging from modern physics. They are intended to suggest that Eastern thought and, more generally, mystical thought provide a consistent and relevant philosophical background to the theories of contemporary science, a conception of the world in which scientific discoveries can be in perfect harmony with spiritual aims and religious beliefs. These two basic themes, the two basic themes of this conception are the unity and interrelation of all phenomena and the intrinsically dynamic nature of the universe. The further we penetrate into the sub-microscopic world, the more we shall realize how the modern physicists, like the Eastern mystic, has come to see the world as a system of inseparable, interacting, and ever-moving components, with the observer being an integral part of the system. The organic, ecological worldview of the Eastern philosophies is no doubt one of the main reasons for the immense popularity they have gained in the West, especially among young people. In our Western culture, which is still dominated by the mechanistic, fragmented view of the world, an increasing number of people, increasing even more so now, an increasing number of people have seen this as the underlying reason for the widespread dissatisfaction in our society. And many have turned to Eastern ways of liberation, again, which is happening right now. It is interesting, and perhaps not too surprising, that those who are attracted to Eastern mysticism, who consult the I Ching, such as Carl Jung, and practice yoga or other forms of meditations, in general, have a marked anti-science attitude. Fascinating. What? I need to read that again. It is interesting, and perhaps not too surprising, that those who are attracted by the Eastern mysticism, who consult the I Ching or yoga, why would that make someone anti-science? Interesting. I wonder, is it more likely for a scientific person? I mean, it would seem completely backwards, but who knows? They tend to see science and physics in a particular, and they tend to see science and physics in a particular as an unimaginative, narrow-minded discipline, which is responsible for all the evils of modern technology. That's going a bit too far. This, of course, for religious, spiritual fanatics, but I think that's taking it a bit too far. This book aims at improving the image of science by showing that there is an essential harmony between the spirit of Eastern wisdom and Western science. It attempts to suggest that modern physics goes far beyond technology, that the way of the Tao of physics can be a path with a heart, a way to spiritual knowledge and self-realization. Again, bringing those two poles of the world. So that was chapter 1. The next chapter is called Knowing and Seeing. We'll take a look at that also a bit later, but I'm really tired because I read now almost 15 minutes. I didn't even plan to read that long. I thought I was going to read a portion, but this book is really good, and I've just picked it up for the first time now. It's been on my list. I saw it in I think I read this. I came across it in a podcast discussion, or someone referred this to me, and so it's been sitting there for a few weeks, and finally picked it up today. And there's so much here. God, I cannot wait to finish this book. I wish I could just read the whole thing tonight and just record it, but it's not that long. It's under 400 pages. But as I said before, the writing is kind of small, so I'm just like, my eyes fucked up, guys. Ugh. Anyways, even the closing part, let me just read that last sentence. Or this book aims at improving the image of science by showing that there is an essential harmony between spirit of the Eastern wisdom and Western science. So again, this is how I was thinking to help assist those people who struggle in those programs to accept, believe in, or trust, dare I say, surrender to a higher power. This book is going to help you surrender. I mean, the fact that these two groups of people, scientists, Western scientists and Eastern mystics, for example, which is what we're going to be discussing now, but there are more, they had developed these two opposing worldviews that were initially together because of the original Greek philosophy, but then that broke apart when, what's that name, guy? That Parmenides. So when the Parmenides came in and these began to split, so from that unity perspective, and then the Western science started to go that way, and then the Eastern mysticism, that's when they separated, and now they're coming back together. And so even that is almost like an oscillation. If you think of life as an energy, like a wave, an oscillation like this. So it's like you have, like, they crossed, they went back apart, and then now they're crossing again, like, first of all, I'm trying to look at the screen and do my fingers and it's not working. So it's kind of like, God, let me just write it down on paper. It's going to be much better because my finger there is not working. That was ridiculous. I'm going to write it on the receipt of this. I feel like I'm in physics class now. Lord have mercy. I love this. I wish I could study. I wish I had studied physics, but I'm not that mathematically gifted. But it was one of my favorite subjects in school. So maybe they started the same, and then they went down, and now they're coming back up. Okay. I don't know. So if you think about energy as waves, right? So maybe this one wave here on the bottom is the Western science, and then the top line is the Eastern mysticism. So if you imagine, and we're going opposite here. So this is the starting point when they are coming from the same unified origin. So the ancient Greek, the ancient Greek philosophies, the ancient Greek mysticism, rather, and then eventually it's that splitting, the separation, the gap between of the understandings. We have this, probably the maximum time is maybe with Rene Descartes and the Enlightenment is like the maximum time that there would be. God, this is so difficult, guys. I need to find a more effective way to do this because I'm struggling. So like this gap right here is probably the Enlightenment, because that's like when the Western thought, they have the most power. So it's separating the most because they go so much into the head. As Descartes said, "Cartigo ergo sum." So you think, therefore you are. You've kind of separated the body from the mind. You're acting like they are two separate things. Another way to challenge this is how we know or have read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And so that is how we can prove that your memories are not just in your mind. Your memories are also in your body. They're stored in your fascia, in your muscles, in your mitochondria. And that could either be because they are the same, or because a perspective has been missed, right? And that's why this is, again, so important, because now we're coming at a point where we're starting to converge again, right? We're starting to come back to that point of singularity where we have more and more research that proves and justifies how this Eastern thought is actually explained and justified with Western physics and quantum physics. And so that's the first chapter of this book. I'm going to stop it for here today. because I've read a lot. I didn't plan to read that much, not today anyway. But I also got a little bit distracted talking and having a little bit of a long introduction. So yeah, guys, I hope that you really enjoyed the book. Again, here is the book in case you want to check it out. I don't remember exactly where or who gave me the reference, but it is an excellent book. So I've read through some summaries, and I've also listened to some, I think, YouTube lectures or summaries of this book, but this is my first time to actually start picking it. And we're going to get into some real physics, guys. So I hope you guys get ready. It's going to get into some geek mode stuff here. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Cheers.